Hey everybody, Josh Sigurdson, World Alternative Media here, and of course we're joined by author and economic analyst here at WAM, John Sneisen, and more struggles for the Canadian economy. As this Financial Post article says, Canada among 3 economies in world most at risk of a banking crisis, Bank for International Settlements warns. And as the article says, China, Canada, and Hong Kong are among the economies most at risk of a banking crisis, according to early warning indicators compiled by the Bank for International Settlements. Canada, whose economy grew last year at the fastest pace since 2011, was flagged thanks to its households' maxed out credit cards and high debt levels in the wider economy. Household borrowing is also seen as a risk factor for China and Hong Kong, according to the study. The indicators, as this quote says, currently point to the buildup of risks in several economies. Analysts Inaki Aldasoro, Claudia Borio, and Matthias Drayman wrote in the BIS's latest quarterly review published on Sunday. And of course, on top of this, we see this other article from Financial Post that Canadian household debt hits $1.8 trillion as Global Watchdog warns of risks to the economy. That Global Watchdog, of course, with Equifax Canada, and as it goes on to say, 37% of Canadians added to their debt, pushing averages up to $22,837 per person, not including mortgages. So we've talked about this before, John. All fiat currency eventually reverts to its intrinsic value of zero. It always has, always will, going back to 1024 AD in China, ironically enough, China. And on top of this, of course, the fundamentals are off the table due to the level of manipulation in the monetary system and the markets. So you can't put a finger on when the crash is going to happen, but it's inevitable. It has to happen eventually. And we're seeing so many warning signs. And now we're even seeing the top globalist, financial organizations and groups warning of it, because they want to be able to say later on, after it all happens, after it's all done and finished, they can say, oh, see, we warned you. That's why you need us. Look, it's just a Hegelian dialectic of problem, reaction, solution, repeat over and over and over again, perpetuating all the same problems over again, using the problem as a solution to create more problems. You see what I mean? It just keeps going in circles forever, folks. And John, what do you think about this? I mean, this is just piling up higher and higher and higher and more difficult for individuals to get out of it.
Well, if the article was come out, I actually wrote an article in late 2015 that later became my book, because I read about a year or so it took me to write the book, Canada, the greatest economy in the world, ?
Up on Amazon.
And of course, one of the big things in my book is all of this debt that I was warning about at those levels. I said they will heavily increase. Well, surprise, surprise, they increased massively. And now what we're seeing is trouble signs from of course, the elitists that finally, open their mouths, because it takes them a while for them to they don't want to be, early warning. So they want to let the banks keep, making a whole bunch of money on that debt before they actually said, like, oh yeah, we created a massive bubble. They created a massive bubble over there in Canada. They didn't, deleverage in 2008 when the whole world deleveraged.
It reminds me of, the plunge protection team in the United States under the Federal Reserve when the stock market goes down. It's like, let's flow a bunch of money in and give a bunch of optimism and extra euphoria to the already bubbled markets and say, get in. Now's the time to buy, when it's like the worst time to buy, because everything is just dependent on investor confidence, and there's absolutely no fundamental reason or value there.
Yeah, well, with private debt to GDP from 2016 was 267%. That should just be a massive warning sign. I was talking about that back in my book. And now, of course, we're just waiting. Unfortunately, they haven't come out with the numbers yet, but if the 2017 numbers is not going to look good, I could promise you that. Now, I just wanted to mention that we've been talking about private debt. It's not just private debt that are terrible in Canada. It's, of course, the massive public debt. Now, for an example is the province of Ontario, which has a massive amount of debt that they have accumulated. They have $311 billion of debt that they have accumulated, versus, for example, I think it was $100 and something billion that California has accumulated, but California is almost 3 times bigger. So that should just be a massive warning sign. And then, of course, the Canadian government is at $651 billion in debt currently, and just massively increasing. They said that they're going to run deficits till 2046.
Well, when did those statistics come out, by the way?
This was from 2016, so of course those numbers are up again.
We've had Trudeau in office for a couple years since then, so we can imagine that things have changed a little bit. Of course, it doesn't matter what prime minister or puppet you put in. Either way, it's going to happen because they don't personally have control over it. But these policies, the massive taxation, the massive regulations, definitely don't help the situation.
No, they make it a lot worse. And what I've studied is the taxation in countries versus the private debt to GDP. It correlates. All the countries, the top 20 countries in the world that have the highest taxes are almost always on the top 20 list of highest debt in the private sector. So what you're seeing is people are getting squeezed from all sides, and on top of that, you also get high inflation because the government is spending a lot of money. There's a lot of higher inflation ever seen. It's just enough to go to the store here in Canada. You'll see how high the inflation is compared to what they're telling you. People are getting just strangled slowly. It's like you're gasping for air, but it's like being in a terrible dream where you're gasping for air for years and you're starting to you're feeling like you're dying constantly, and that's where we're at with the Canadian economy. And of course China and others that have been talked about there. There's so many debt-ridden countries now because debt just creates more debt, and it just creates this infamous bubble in one sector, or now in Canada it's basically every sector, and it's just a mountain of debt. It's like a eruption, it's like all the sewage from all the cities in Canada just erupted and started to flood all over the place, and that's what the debt is. It's raw sewage just slushing.
Let's go for a swim. And it kind of reminds me of, it's collectivism in government, always beget more collectivism in government. Of course, if you're shoved down a bottomless pit of debt, you are forced to ask for a ladder up from the government and the banking system, putting you in perfect servitude to them, exactly where they want you, because a populace in debt is a populace in servitude. And that's why individuals need to take action as individuals and be financially responsible, financially stable, self-sufficient, and look to themselves and independent individuals. With education, you have to do your own due diligence in order to be able to function in life, rather than depend on the government and the banks to do things for you, when their obligation really to themselves is to push you further into servitude and push you further into debt. They don't have your best interests in mind. They always want to find a new way to further extort you. Look at the carbon tax. Look at the regulations that are monopolizing big corporations under the guise of stopping big corporations, and taxation that's supposed to stop big corporations but meanwhile is propping up those big corporations, pushing small businesses out of the market. And that is exactly what they're trying to do. They're destroying the middle class. They're propping up, not 1%, the 0.0001%, and then shoving the rest into poverty. And this is the government's doing. And that's why individuals need to take action and understand these things. So as I always say, John, food, water, shelter, self-defense. You're not gathering things for the toughest guy on the block. And of course, gold, silver, cryptocurrency, as long as the fundamentals are there, they have to be fundamentally sound. Do your own due diligence. Cash flow and capital gains. Be very aware of what you are doing. This is our opinion, not advice. You need to be some kind of Keynesian salesman to be able to give that kind of advice. But folks, it all comes down to you, because responsibility is a hallmark of freedom itself. And when it comes down to it, you need to take that action upon yourself to make sure that you are able to take care of yourself and your family. And of course, diversification is so important. John?
Well, I can just end it with one last thing, which is the death of the middle class. They have been used as a milking cow. They were the ones that actually fed the government. Government's growing, but then over years, you start to see sudden deficit spending. And that's because the middle class can't even sustain the government size anymore. And it's just a big failure of governments and, of course, all the debt in Canada. It's not going to look very good, unfortunately. But in my book, I have some bright signs. I can tell you that, we are, as a country, we're probably one of the most self-sustainable countries in the world if you go and look at what resources we have here.
It doesn't look like that when I hang around the university.
Well, I'm not talking about the universities. I'm talking about the actual things that we eat, things that we use to build things. Those things are what is sustainable, not the universities. The universities should be eliminated.
Yeah, indoctrination camps to the max, big Marxist indoctrination camps. Well, it's important to also mention, as I finish it off, the retirement funds, pensions are doomed. Ponzi scheme, the Canadian pension Ponzi.
We forgot that one.
Yeah, well, it's just hitting us from all ends, which is why we need to be self-sustainable. It's so important, folks. It's basically the basis of life itself. Going back thousands of years to the beginning of humanity, it's always been important for us to be able to be independent and be able to depend on ourselves rather than some gigantic collective coercion, this organized crime racket that we call the governments and banking system. Anyway, before we go overly long, as we usually do, thanks for going into this with us, John. And until next time, this is Josh Sigurdson and John Sneisen signing out from World Alternative Media. Find the truth,
Be the change.
Like what you see here at WAM, don't forget to check the links below. GoFundMe, Patreon. We can't do it without you. Any donation is very much appreciated, especially as we are so vastly demonetized and censored by YouTube as the ADL comes in and flags all of our content as hate speech. You can also find our Bitcoin address in the description as well as on the screen for you to scan, if you please. And don't forget to find us at Josh Sigurdson at steemit.com. That's steemit.com, the future of social media, where you get paid in the upvote of your post in cryptocurrency, Steem that is. So don't forget to find us there. And until next time, this is Josh Sigurdson signing out from World Alternative Media. Find the truth, be the change.